Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Amplify Your Business. Today, I'm pleased to introduce my next guest. His name is Yoni Kominsky, and he's the co-founder and CEO of two companies, Ekeala and Multiply Me, as well as he's got his hands in a bunch of other things too, all things focused on entrepreneurship, which is so exciting. So welcome to the show, Yoni.
Lance, it's a pleasure to be here. Very, very excited. We hit it off last time we chatted and have genuinely been looking forward to this. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I am really excited as well because you have a wealth of entrepreneurial experience that you're going to be able to bring to the table. And I know our audience is going to learn a lot from this conversation. So start off with, though, I always like to ask our guests, what are three things that every entrepreneur needs to know or understand as they are starting or growing their entrepreneurial ventures?
It's a great question, Lance, and it takes me on a few different directions. I would say the first thing is for those who haven't quite launched into their entrepreneurial journey, if you're listening to this podcast and you're trying to make that leap and you're not quite sure, I would say one is that no one has it all figured out. So rip the Band-Aid off and take that step. The worst possible thing that can happen to you is that you get into a situation where you have potentially a high-paying job as an employee for someone else. And that's how I look at my worst-case scenario, is that I'd be a valuable asset at someone else's company if everything truly went to pieces. So you've just got to start. I would say that's the first piece of advice I would give, and the first thing to know about entrepreneurship. I'd say the second is that everything comes down to measuring the impact. So really looking and trying to understand what you are shooting for. For most early businesses, how they are and what they ultimately end up being can be two very different things. And again, you're not going to get everything right, but you need to have a goal in mind and you need to be working toward it, iterating and reviewing what's working and what isn't. Because if you're not measuring, then what gets measured gets managed. And if you're not measuring, then you're not managing and you don't really have a guiding post. And I would say, what I was going to actually start off and respond to you, Lance, in saying that, what people here will probably learn is a lot of what not to do's when it comes to entrepreneurship when you listen to me. And I've definitely made plenty of mistakes in my career, but I would say that something that is really important for all entrepreneurs to realize when they're going down this journey is that outside of just the measurement and getting it right, and outside of the fact that, you can always start and fall back into another position, you really have to be critical into what it is you are building and being self-critical. So it's all well and good in an environment, as an example, that I found myself in, where I was growing 3 businesses from nothing to a team of over 100, revenue, year-on-year growth, and everything was great. And then the economy took a turn and shit hit the proverbial fan, so to speak. And what I realized, in a really long-winded way of explaining it, is it all comes down to focus. So if you are trying to get your hands around too many things, then you'll ultimately succeed in none of them, or at least not to the level that you can. So having intentional focus and driving in a single direction is really, I think, what sets most entrepreneurs right. You don't necessarily have to be the best. You don't have to have the best product. You don't need to be the best at sales. You don't have to have the best marketing, the best branding. If you can just do everything relatively well and be aligned in where you're driving toward, then I think the rest of it will really sort itself out.
Yeah, and I think this is probably going to be the theme to the secret behind your success, I suspect, because you're a guy who is doing a ton of things. And so what the audience doesn't know is that you've got a couple of young children at home. You're living right now in Tel Aviv. And so there's all these global events happening right now. You're, at war. And at the same time, you're flying back and forth to the US with your business ventures, and like there's just a lot going on in your life right now, and yet you're able to continue to grow and manage these businesses, and that is just absolutely fascinating to a guy like me who really truly struggles to just create one business and keep it afloat, and you've got all these other things going on. So I want to dig into the secrets behind that, how you're able to accomplish that. But before I do that, I'd love for you to explain a little bit about the businesses that you're involved with. What is it that you guys are doing with those businesses? What problems are you trying to solve, so that people have a bit of context as to what you're currently doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a lot to dive into and unpack there around the sort of split focus and all of the peripheral things that are going on. But in terms of what we're doing from a service delivery perspective, so I have two main companies and a joint venture. The first and the most easy to understand is called Multiply Me, and it's a Filipino-focused recruitment agency where we find high-level talent in the Philippines: designers, podcast editors, content writers, project managers, ops managers. I mean, you're getting a theme. These are people that are accountable, responsible, and have a meaningful skill set and are not VAs. So that's Multiply Me. We then have Ekeala, which is a boutique process improvement management consultancy, which is just a whole lot of management consultancy jargon to state that what we do with our team of about 30 consultants is we'll go into businesses, we interview, shadow, review, we'll document the process maps, so what's actually happening in the business, with our goal to understand any of the inefficiencies, any of the limitations that might exist around scalability inside of that business, where we build the future state. We build all the future state process maps. We'll build all the standard operating procedures, the SOPs, training videos, documentation, the company workflows and automations in a project management tool like Monday, Trello, Asana, you name it. And will effectively create scale into the business via systems, as opposed to just sort of throwing people at the problem, which can be typical. And again, I've been guilty of that myself, especially having a high value, low cost recruitment function out of the Philippines. And the last business is a joint venture, which takes up considerably less of my time, just given the fact that I do have my hands quite full with these other two, sort of full-time focused businesses. And it's a $50 million facility that we stood up with an e-commerce investment bank, a company that's selling e-commerce businesses, called GW Partners, and Sellers Fi. They're a premier non-dilutive capital lender for e-commerce businesses looking to scale. So we're effectively investing capital into these businesses and growing them to exit over a 2-year period, where we're deriving all the value that each one of our businesses does, coming together and sort of building that roadmap on how do we drive toward a larger multiple exit, where we take a piece of the upside impact of that business. So that's what I'm up to. Couple other little things internally for you guys to know as well, is we have a product team too. So we have a team of about 10 that's building our own technology for predominantly Multiply Me. And I also have, while I'm not actually recording at the moment, I have a podcast too. So there's a lot of things that are definitely going on at the same time here.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And so this is the question that everybody's going to want me to ask: is how is it that you are actually able to manage all of that with the busy young family life, and the travel that you have, and then you're very involved with your community and all the efforts around, the war and stuff that's happening right now currently there around you. And so how do you manage it all?
So to answer that question, Lance, I think the first important thing that all entrepreneurs need to be accountable for and understanding of is that we're simply not the best at everything. We don't have every skill set. We're not these unicorns that can do absolutely everything. And to
Yeah.
just have a little bit of, to eat a little bit of humble pie, so to speak, and accept what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. And I would say I have a tremendous amount of weaknesses. I'm not the best manager of people. I am not someone who is particularly financially savvy when it comes to really looking at the balance sheet, and those meetings just aren't the most exciting, but there's a few things that I am good at. And I would say the skill set that I'm probably, I like to think I'm best at is identifying the capabilities in others and understanding where they might fit in the equation. So I would say that, I'm very, very fortunate that I have two incredible business partners, one of which I co-founded the business with, and he is, the ultimate operator, Lippy, who is just one of the best COOs and operationally minded individuals I've come across in my career. And then I've
Mm.
also had the opportunity, and I guess this is an interesting story for entrepreneurs who might have found themselves in a similar position where we'd built an established business. It was already doing a considerable amount of revenue. And a really good friend of mine of 15 years, actually, who was at an investment bank in Australia, we'd been talking for years and he was interested in what we were up to. And we ended up convincing him to join as an equity partner in the business. And he did everything from building a financial model to now sitting across our sales function and really building that into something that's a lot more systematic, as well as helping us expand into new verticals. So I would say, coming back to your question, how am I able to do all of the things that I'm able to do? I focus on a very small component of it. When I look at my accountabilities, one is I'm responsible for managing our marketing team of about 12 internally. That's the background that I came from, and I sit in that seat. I would say I'm also, while I'm not the one accountable for our sales function, I'm quite involved in the relationship building component and getting our message out there and things of that nature. And I would say a lot of just the longer term vision is something that I'm really passionate about. And, my other two partners who also have great vision are often sort of putting me back in my box, so to speak, and saying, hey, that's great, but we've got to get this business right before we think of the next 10. And I think one of my realizations, and this comes through having really great partners that will challenge you and that will not agree with every, you're not looking for yes women and yes men. At least I'm not in how I'm looking to operate, but it's all comes down to what you say no to as opposed to what you say yes to. And I think that that's one of the most important skill sets that I continue to try and evolve and work through. And it's definitely, I'm definitely one that historically really suffered from that shiny object syndrome, but
Yeah.
now having the right partners in place and really building that vision and working backwards to our 3-year plan and our 1-year plan and what the business needs to look like, I think it's created a lot of focus that's enabled us to actually achieve a lot more. And part of that comes to our sort of focus on consolidation as well. If we're trying to sell everything, we'll sell nothing. So how do we get consistent messaging and how do we continue to bring these different functions closer and closer together so it just makes life a whole lot easier?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there, and one of the things that when I reflect back on my journey and the things that I've been involved with, different businesses, in trying to balance a few different ones. One of the things that I've observed in myself is that I'm very, very deadline oriented, and so if I have a very compacted schedule, I can get a lot of shit done and I can stay extremely focused. It's when I have those gaps, when I have some time to myself, I really do fall into that trap of the shiny object syndrome, or I'm a tinkerer as well. And so I like to break things apart and rebuild them. And business is exactly the same thing, or processes or systems within our business and so on. And so anytime that my staff sees me, they know I'm idle or that I don't have as much on my plate, is when I start to break things within the business. And so I'm curious if that is also part of one of the secrets to your success, in the sense that you have a plate completely full. And so there isn't any room really to chase off after other shiny objects. Does that keep the guardrail sort of on your day to day?
I've never thought about that. I've never stopped to think about that, Lance. But I think that there might be a degree of reality in that. When I think a little bit, and just to share with everyone listening, one of the important milestones or big steps that we took this year, as into our 5th year, and I would say as a sign of maturity, is we spent 5 days, myself and my two business partners, offsite on strategy planning. And what we really did was we analyzed each of the key functions inside of our business, as well as any of the big decisions that we believed that we needed to make this year. And we sort of hypothesized. So how the sessions worked is they were typically sort of 2 to 3 hour sessions around each of the different components. And we worked and we talked about everything from what does our hiring roadmap look like for the next 12 months to things like legal and compliance and incorporation components inside of different geographies, all the way through to sales and marketing focus, as an example. And I think that one, yes, there is so much going on for us that it's very hard to sort of take too long of a breath, a breath of air to sort of get complacent or lose focus, because you really need to be laser focused. But I think what came out of that is that we committed to, instead of, if you're familiar, and I think we might have talked about the Entrepreneurial Operating System, EOS, as a business operating system. For those listening, it's a fantastic baseline operating system for businesses that are between 5 and 250 people, and highly recommend anyone read the book Traction, Getting a Grip. Really, really fascinating and fantastic methodology to help get your business a high degree of traction. One of the things we realized is that because we're such a big team right now, to be doing these quarterly rocks, as they define them, these quarterly goals in the book, it was too short-winded when we had to pull out, teams of up to 100 people had to sit each quarter for up to a week working on these next 90 days. The cycles were too short. So we're now working on 6-month targets and goals, and we're aligning that with our weekly and monthly cadence of review. So systematically, we're saying, are these on track or off track? And I think that that's been pretty material when it comes to building that plan, sticking to it, and having that really critical feedback loop where everyone in the company who's sitting on these leadership meetings can see, are you on track or off track? And, I think as entrepreneurs for sure, but I think just generally human nature in a business and how we operate is that when you have those aspects out in front for all to see, you don't want to let anyone else down. So I think as a byproduct of it, because everyone can see it, the likelihood of success is probably greater. So it's a really long-winded answer for you, Lance, but I think that there were sort of two parts to why I see us. We're far from getting everything right, but I think we have a good approach to at least holding ourselves accountable.
Yeah, and on this podcast, we've had many people talk about EOS, Entrepreneur Operating System, and Traction, and how systems are really at the bedrock of their success. Systematizing their businesses is the only way that they can really effectively scale. I'm curious, with your experience, were you knowledgeable about and trained within EOS prior to starting the last couple of ventures, which you said were about 5 years ago? Or is this something that you incorporated into the business after the business was launched?
So for us, we stumbled upon Traction about a year into the Multiply Me business, and it was something that hit me like a ton of bricks. I just realized that I was somewhat siloed from my business partner, Lippy, or my co-founder at the time. We were both sort of head down driving. I read the book, and for those, again, who have read the book will know there's the visionary and the integrator are the two, key drivers of any business. And I was operating as the visionary on the sales and marketing side, which is typical for that sort of leader to sit in. And the integrator leadership role is very much on the operations and system design piece. So it took me a while to convince Lippy to read that book. And then when he read it, I knew that I needed him to be the one to help administer and implement it. And I would say we probably could have got through it a little quicker if we didn't have the ego that we had at the time with a management consulting practice and having all these really intelligent people. We thought, we'll just self-implement, we'll be able to crush it. And it took probably 6 to 12 months longer than it should have because we didn't just pay for the help. So lesson learned, but we definitely retrofitted. And I would say today, we actually just sponsored the EOS event. I was just at the EOS worldwide event in San Diego last week, and I don't know if any of them listen to this, but I wouldn't say that we are a purist when it comes to EOS. There's things that we have now sort of built into our system, and we support a lot of EOS businesses with their systems, operations, and talent. So again, coming back to less the question, just more the operating system. If you're not running in any form of operating system and you all have your head down, if you just read this book and it'll take you seriously a weekend, you can listen to the audio book in probably 8 hours, if that. Just the things that you'll learn from a baseline frameworks perspective, I think can be really revolutionary. Even if you just pull out things like the level 10 meeting or the rocks and how you do your goal setting, it's a really powerful thing for those who are not sort of even on that spectrum yet.
Yeah, and I like your experience that you shared in terms of thinking that you'd be able to implement it on your own, and that was just really delaying the successful execution of it and integration of it in your business, and then you went to an expert consultant within that space, right? And so, is that somebody that you continue to engage with on an ongoing basis, or once you got things up and rolling, then now you guys are just implementing it on your own?
Yeah, so generally speaking, the way the EOS model works is that you'll have sort of these I believe it's 6 or 8 sessions with what they would define as an implementer, and through it they'll walk you through your core values and vision day and help you build your rocks, and they sort of put a mirror up to your face. So we had like a degree, I would say like a fractional degree of support with that. We worked with a few different fractional integrators, they would sort of define themselves as, to help build out some of these aspects. But for us, we again call it ego or call it experience. We have a process improvement consultancy, and there were just things in the framework that we felt we could improve upon, and that we had people that were really accountable. And again, coming back to just your very early questions about how do you do it all, I feel very
Yeah.
blessed that I have some really capable operators around me that really allow us to bring a lot of the vision to reality and execute it the way that we do. And so we've not been sort of revisiting any form of fractional integrator or leveraging implementers, but it's really just been about sort of committing to the build out of our methodology. And a lot of that sort of maturity happened in the back of last year and start of this year, just saying, well, we're really good at selling and we're really good at delivering value and service, but we really need to be intentional about the business that we're creating, that we can create reoccurring value for our clients, and we can actually, build something that isn't, for instance, in Ekeala, it's project based for most of it. Now we have a recurring value model that's attached to it, but up until recently, it was just bring in a project, deliver. People are
Yeah.
like, this is amazing. How do we keep working together? And we say, well, we don't have anything to offer you. And so I think coming back to it, it's because of these systems, because we looked really deeply at our financial modeling, thanks to bringing in someone like Brandon, who that's what he's done his whole career. We were able to be a lot more critical about the business and see things that we otherwise hadn't up until this point.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that I'm really curious about too, as the visionary that you are, in that role that you're playing within your companies, you have Multiply Me, which is that outsourced, support model for other companies. And I know you said that it's not focused on VA oriented support; it's more a little more knowledge focused, skill focused, right, in terms of the people that you're placing there in other businesses. I'm really curious though, because when I look at AI and what AI is disrupting currently and what it's going to be disrupting even more so, I think, in the next 6 to 12 months, is a lot of that repetitive tasks and creative tasks now, which is really interesting. So your business, that particular one, I'm wondering how you are thinking through that risk that's on the horizon of AI being able to replace maybe a lot of those potential people that you are your product, right, that you're putting out into the marketplace.
Yeah, fantastic question, and definitely something that I've thought about quite a bit. I would say over the years as well. I was one of those people. I mean, I came from creative advertising. I spent a long time in that space, and I always thought to myself, creatives are always going to have a place,
Yeah,
because how
totally.
can someone possibly come up with the design work or the idea? And now you're sitting between ChatGPT and Midjourney and everything else that exists in market today, and you're seeing like some pretty incredible advancements. And you know, I think, like you're pointing out here, Lance, we're just touching the tip of the iceberg here of what is likely going to be possible in the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months.
Yep.
And I still believe that there's always going to be a place for that human interaction. And I think that, as AI evolves and we're able to leverage it in more meaningful ways, I think that it's going to do a few different things. I think one is that there'll be role augmentation. So, as an example, I think I read an article the other day that Google's already paying um, prompt engineers $250,000 a year just to come up with all the prompt engineering for these platforms. So you still have to have some degree of intelligence in order to actually create the value that AI
Yep.
can unlock. And so I see like a degree of augmentation in two ways. One is, sure, there'll be role augmentation, but I would say, for example, I still want to have a high quality creative director or graphic designer that's driving the creative brand and vision. And maybe they become a lot more expansive. So, leveraging these tools, instead of being able to produce one piece of content today, maybe it's 10, 20, 50. And all of a sudden, all the initiatives that we're trying to work on are greatly reduced in a cost output perspective, or expanded just from a volume perspective without compromising on quality. So I would say there's probably a reality where lower level VAs really need to start thinking through their educational skill sets and how they can create more value for the clients that they're trying to serve, or the employers, or however the relationship looks like. But I actually personally see a lot more opportunity, and I think it actually is going to help level the playing field for onshore, offshore. I'd say one of the really scary things that I've seen is that the US always had the upper hand when it came to building brands. And when we talk about e-commerce, it was that they understand the US market, they get the value that's brought up. And now you see a lot of these Chinese sellers that are now leveraging these tools and are building beautiful brands and are really understanding the demographic. And all of a sudden, because they can produce for a fraction of the price that we can in the West, then you see this really seismic shift. So I think that's like one of the things that I'm actually most concerned about, is that with these advancements in AI, people that are non-native English speakers that don't really understand the markets that they're servicing have found ways to actually, in some cases, outperform those that are really informed. And I think that's where things,
Yeah.
to me, start to get a little bit scary.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you're right in terms of the leveling of the playing field in a lot of respect, and it goes both ways, right? So I think what you're saying there with regard to China or some of these other lower cost, producing countries, they have that ability. Like the instructions are no longer going to be unlegible or illegible when it comes to some of the product instructions I've gotten out of China or Taiwan or wherever else. It doesn't really matter. And the same thing with a lot of the marketing material. It would miss the mark, obviously, because there's a language barrier there, and they were doing their best with their translators and interpreters and so on. Now that levels that playing field, like you said. But I think also on the flip side too, like us in North America, so the U.S., Canada, and other developed nations are going to be in a situation now where we have a lower cost entry level repetitive task person now, AI, that's going to be able to handle a lot of that, which will level the playing field against some of those other developing countries in which the cost of labor is so much lower. So it is going to be really interesting. One thing that I really wonder about, like when you're talking about the creative aspect and the need for that, creative director, that creative director is going to be in high demand, and I think like you said, should really benefit from a lot of this because they can be so much more productive with a team of juniors and AI. So I think the output's going to be really there. So the value is going to be great. What I'm concerned about is you go a few years of this and all of those people that were, juniors that would get trained then up to be able to take on those roles of creative director. There's going to be so fewer of those people, I think, in the system because at the junior level, they're going to get replaced with AI. So I'm worried about that knowledge gap that's going to occur or the transition of the knowledge from the best creative minds as directors into the junior people. I just don't know how we're going to evolve our people in the future. It's going to be really interesting.
It's a super interesting conundrum that you're putting out there, and yeah, it's like it's maybe a little bit reminiscent of, or I mean, totally different. But I'm just trying to think. My mind's always like, what comparative, what comparison can I pull from my mental archives around things that have happened. And I think one of the really interesting things that happened as an example in Australia, and I think it's happening in a lot of first world countries, is that you had skills like being a laborer or a plumber or an electrician. We call them sparkies in Australia, and way better name. But those were typically relatively low paying skill sets for the longest time. It wasn't really a job that was, it's not that it was frowned upon, but it wasn't like a high end, high value role that society deemed was worth a significant salary. And as a result of so many people now invested in higher college educations and not going to these trade schools, there's been a massive decline in each of those really now high value skill sets. And so I look at my mates in Australia who are any one of those professions, and they are taking home enormous six-figure salaries, and they're building companies, and it's really, really hard as well to even crack into that market. And so I think there's maybe an argument to be made that this becomes a really specialized skill set where people are going to college for it, and they're really sort of on that career path, maybe not from just a designer perspective, but the goal is to become that creative director. And maybe there's far fewer, but the cost of bringing one on probably becomes quite a bit higher. And maybe, with the gaps that start to show up, so too does that demand of like, I can really now make a meaningful salary. Not that it wasn't, not that it was a low paid job before. And so I think that just there's going to be these natural occurring gaps in the market that people identify and fill. And I think that's going to be true for all of AI, and for how, even when we look at the remote work and emerging world environments, I think that there's always going to be gaps that we find. And it's just a changing landscape as opposed to a disappearing one.
Yeah. I think you're right. It's going to be, we will adapt obviously to that gap that maybe will start to emerge. And so there will be adjustments made in order to fill it. And so I'm fascinated to see how that all plays out. It's creating such an interesting source of great conversations anyway that I'm having with other entrepreneurs in terms of the way that they're incorporating and approaching AI in their businesses right now. So I mean, one of the best quotes that I've ever heard, and I can't remember who the person is who spoke it, but it's basically that AI isn't coming for your job. AI is those companies who embrace AI, they're the ones that are going to be coming for your job, essentially, right? And so if you don't embrace it, you're going to die. With that in mind, how is it that you guys are incorporating AI into your businesses right now, out of curiosity?
Yeah. So I'd say, just off the top of my head, some of the applications that we've found value in is one, we obviously, as a recruitment company placing 40 plus people every single month into other businesses, we have to create a lot of job descriptions, and they have to be bespoke, custom to what the company's objectives are, and then how do we plug a hole in the business as opposed to just hiring for the sake of hiring someone. And so we built an AI uh, an AI powered job description builder where we answer 6 questions, and on the back of those 6 questions, it'll spit out. We use the 4 R's: role, requirements, results, and I always forget the last R. I really need to. It's like history, like their experience around it, and so it's actually free on our website, on our Multiply Me website. Anyone can use it externally as well, but that's one way where we've been able to, I would say from a client perspective, we look way more impressive because we can get off a phone call, off a discovery call, and send them a job description that's very much aligned with what they are based on the inputs that we get off the call. So that's one use case. I would say another use case is that from a sales perspective for our consulting practice, we have to come up with a lot of complex problem statements, things that need to be true that we will solve in a business for us to put together a proposal and work together. And because we've worked with about 150 businesses right now, we have a lot of historic problem statements. We have a lot of information on our business. And what I do, and I had a discovery call earlier today, is I'll record it leveraging fireflies.ai or any other such note-taking tool. I'll input all the information and then I'll request that it provides me with 3 problem statements that are aligned with all the history. So that used to be an activity for me and anyone who would get on discovery calls that would actually take hours to synthesize into hitting the nail on the head. It can probably get us 80 to 90% of the way there, and it turns it into about an hour's worth of work, which was quite a considerable amount of time listening to the hour and a half recording and going through it. So that's another way that we've been using it. And I'd say the last way that we've incorporated it is into SEO. We have several content writers on our team, and there's a number of tools that you can use to Hemingway, for example, to make sure that it's at a 6th grade level so that it's really easy for people to understand. You can run it through to make sure that it's unique content. So there's ways in which you can't totally hand it off, but you can augment it. And coming back to the point that I was calling out before, what used to be, a couple articles a week, 2, 3, 4 articles a week that we could have a copywriter or a content writer produce is now 1 a day, 1 to 2 a day. And so all of a sudden it's really made our SEO capabilities quite significant. So where I'd say I'll give you, for you guys listening, something that it's very rare that my team actually say I've got a good idea. So I'd like to share this one with the world. Lippy, Brandon, if you're listening to this, thank you. But what I suggested that we do now is we have internally a culture club. We have a group of several team members that get together to put on cultural events around the company in a digital and also in a localized experience. And we're now creating an AI club. Effectively, anyone that's passionate about AI internally can join. And what we'll look to do is say, it's not how do we solve for the entire business, it's what am I playing around with, what excites me, what do I see as applications, but then bringing that information to senior leadership and saying, I could use that in this function, I could use that in this function, and really trying to cross-pollinate these use cases, because we're all playing around with it in some way, shape, or form, and some people are a lot more bought in than others. So there's a nugget. If you take nothing else, guys, that's a good one.
Yeah, I do love that. And for those who are listening to this episode, it's really, I think, interesting to see where we go with a job description that's actually going to be focused on that. I think in the very near future, a lot of businesses are going to start hiring people who are just basically AI tinkerers, people who are playing around with all of the different platforms and all of the different SaaS products that are coming out. Because the thing that I'm finding, and I don't know, I'd imagine the same for you, is once you start to research a bit into it, I mean, there is just a vast number, and they're constantly changing and more getting added every single day in terms of tools out there that are AI empowered, I guess you could say, that can really make a huge impact on your business. And so I think for a lot of industries, a lot of really fast moving industries, and I consider the marketing industry to be one of them, we really have to be at the leading edge of that. And I think those companies who are the ones that are going to survive this. And so we're trying to figure out ways to incorporate AI in every single element of our business. and it's just one, like our department heads, they can't find enough time in the day to be evaluating all the tools that are available each and every day. And so I think that might become a role in the near future that people need to recruit for.
Head of AI. Yeah, I mean, would love to have someone, in for example, we've got a business operations function, putting
Yeah.
someone in the biz ops function accountable to looking at how they can create automations or use cases across the business becomes a pretty exciting opportunity to have a subject matter expert really focused on it. I think that the only area where it starts to lose traction if you sort of centralize or silo that role is just that we're all looking at the problems that we look at each day, and so it's how do you bring that information in a digestible way to have people
Yeah.
think about how do I now apply this to all that I'm working on. And I think that's the secret sauce, if you will, in terms of really scaling your AI use.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about, that club, the AI club, I think that is the connector piece, right? So can you imagine if you had somebody who was the chief AI officer or whatever, the person that's out there trying to discover, unearth all of the different tools that might be useful for your business, top of the class ones, and then you
Yep.
bring those into that environment where the club, and you have all these interested people who are at different levels within your organization that can get excited and interested and provide that feedback as to, oh yeah, I can see how this may be, we can apply here, and if we were to leverage it in this way, it's going to work in this other. Yeah, like I just really see what you're talking about being just a brilliant idea there in terms of having that club within the organization. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm
Okay,
bullish
so
about it too.
so we're going a little long here, and I want to. There's so much I'd like to get to. I want to ask you one last question, just because I want to respect your time as well, and that is, the goals that you have, whatever those goals are, for the next year, whether that's revenue goals or scaling up goals or whatever the case might be. I'm curious, what is the biggest obstacle that you feel that you guys are going to face in achieving that goal? And then how do you plan on overcoming that?
Great question again. So I think it comes back to the third example I gave of entrepreneur entrepreneurial challenges, and it all comes down to focus and saying no. And I think the biggest challenge that we are going to face is trying to build 2 to 3 brands, have a brand book and voice, and go. And I was at a conference in Vegas a month ago, and I was at a conference in San Diego last week. One was for one of our companies, one was for the other company. And because we have to spread ourselves so thin to try and sell 2 different solutions, I think that while it's nice to see multiple revenue streams, and that's always a nice thing to have, what is the true cost? What is the true cost on focusing on just one? And so I would say that if we are not able to get our business model right, where we're able to bring the companies closer and create ongoing value, reoccurring value creation in a meaningful way for all the clients that we service, I would say that that's probably the one thing that will have us come undone, or prevent us from achieving all of our goals. And I think like one really important thing for entrepreneurs to realize, and something that I'm really aware of these days, is that you should never just be chasing a revenue target, because it's a vanity metric. And if that's what you're looking for, to say that you've got an 8-figure business, a 9-figure business, talking about revenue here, then you're not really getting the point. I think that, one of the things that I'm always trying to do is look at ways to make myself redundant and irrelevant as quickly as possible. And that's really like a personal goal for me, is how do I see myself out of something as quickly as possible, as opposed to being that dependency. So coming back to your question, if we don't create focus and there's too much dependency on senior leadership, then I think that's really the biggest hurdles for us.
That's really profound. I love what you just said there in terms of not chasing the revenue goal, and your goal is to eliminate yourself, because I think you're right. The you have to get to a certain size to be able to have enough people in place within your organization to be able to then take on those senior thought leadership aspects within your business, that you then have the ability to remove yourself from it. And the only way you're going to scale to that is through, revenue growth and profitability, obviously, and proper cash flow management, everything else. But really, if that is the single focus that you have as an entrepreneur, is to remove yourself from the equation, everything else naturally has to fall into place, which are all these other metrics that we're always told that we should be focused on. It's profound.
Yep,
I love it.
totally agree.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much. I just really appreciate you sharing your story and giving your insights into some of the things that you're doing, the lessons that you've learned along the way. I know our audience will really value this episode. And for everybody out there who's listening today, if you love this one, you want to check out some other episodes, head over to our archive at amplifyyourbusiness.ca, and you're going to find all of our past and future episodes over there. And of course, just search us up on your favorite podcasting platform. You'll find us there as well. Until next time, everybody, have a prosperous day. And thank you so much, Yoni. I really appreciate it.